Kenny Rosenthal, who is leading the league in information. And Kenny, Lauren just touched on it in the cold open of the show. Barry Zito back in the Bay Area.
Yes, Susan Slusser reporting last night for the San Francisco Chronicle that he has agreed to a minor league contract with the Oakland A's, and this is a homecoming. Remember, guys, the 9th pick of the 1999 draft, before Harold was even breaking down draft candidates, was Barry Zito with the Oakland A's. Now, of course, he left for that 7-year, $126 million free agent contract with the Giants. That contract expired after the 2013 season. He did not pitch last season, but has worked out, impressed scouts in a workout in Houston recently, and now is back as a candidate to make the A's rotation. Now, what are his chances? Well, obviously, it depends first on how he throws.
Oh, he's in.
Hold on a second. You look at some of those candidates right there. Sonny Gray, Casimir, Chavez, Pomerantz, Hahn. They've also acquired Chris Bassett, Sean Nolan, and Kendall Graveman this offseason. The good news for Zito, as he attempts this comeback, is that of all of those rotation candidates, there is only one who is out of options, and that is Jesse Chavez. So if Zito comes in and throws well, you would think he has a reasonable chance. Of course, in 2013, it didn't go all that well for him. But guys, with Zito, I still go back to one of my favorite nights in the ballpark ever. Game 5, 2012 NLCS, Giants versus Cardinals. Giants down 3-1. Of course, this performance, well, it's not showing it right here, but this is World Series Game 1, 2012. But Zito's performance in Game 5 that year was really spectacular. And if you remember, he had not been on the 2010 postseason roster, did not participate in the Giants' run to their first World Series title since 1954, but he was lauded the entire time by Bruce Bochy and others with the Giants for being a good teammate, for trying to make adjustments, for trying at all times to just do his best. He came all the way back, came back to 2012, and made a huge contribution. I'm not saying he's going to be that guy again, but this guy has had a good career, not a great career, not maybe the career we all thought he would have, but he has been someone that has been quite popular with his teammates and front office officials throughout his entire run, and obviously Billy Beane, the GM of the A's, still has a good feeling for Barry Zito.
I think come April, he will be in the rotation, and here's why.
Wow.
Dave Righetti, left-hander. He made nice adjustments with Righetti down the end of his career. And then Kurt Young. These are two of the top pitching coaches in baseball, plus they're left-handed. And I just look at Barry. I don't know what he did this whole year, taking the time off, if he worked on everything. But it took a while for him to realize, I'm not bringing the nasty hook, the nasty fastball, but he figured out how to take a little on, a little off. This is Jamie Moyer all over again. He's figured out how to do it. I think he comes back and he's effective, and he may have a tough time in Arizona in spring training because he's going to give up some home runs because the ball just flies there. But all in all, I think Zito's going to be in the rotation come April.
Just a note here, guys, he does turn 37 in May. But
Perfect.
if indeed he is the next Jamie Moyer, well, then he's just getting started.
Can you believe, Kenny, too? It was, 2007 when he got the deal, 7 years, $126 million, and that was the largest deal for a pitcher at that time. And in just 9 or 10 years, I mean, basically,
Junk is double.
double.
We're scratching our heads. Hey, does he not remind you of Frank Tanana? Ken, you remember Tanana when he made that transition?
But I don't know that Zito ever threw as hard as Tanana did. But
No.
I know what you're talking about, Harold. Tanana made that transition from a power pitcher to a finesse pitcher. Zito has basically done a similar type thing. But again, he's a smart guy, and he is not someone who would sit there and say, I'm going to come back for the sake of coming back. I'm sure he's thought this out pretty deeply, and obviously has trained hard to get back into a position where he can, again, be entertained by a major league team. So we'll see what happens. It will be a fun thing to watch.
Good for him,
spring
man.
training. Absolutely.
All right, so Zito, he won the Cy Young Award back in 2002. Jason Giambi won the MVP award in 2000. And after 20 major league seasons, Giambi is going to hang it up.
At least Giambi was in the movie. Zito didn't make the movie.
That's right, the Moneyball movie. It's Time Machine Tuesday here at Hot Stove. And yeah, we're talking about two guys from the old school, old time days with the Oakland A's, Jason Giambi being the other one. announced his retirement yesterday formally through the New York Daily News, through Mark Feinsand, who often appears on our network. And basically, Giambi has just said it's time, and obviously last year was not his best, but this is someone who we could see as a manager sometime soon. If you guys remember, a couple of years ago, the Rockies considered Jason Giambi very seriously before eventually hiring Walt Weiss. Now, Giambi obviously has had an interesting career in his own right. Big slugger with the A's, signed a big free agent contract with the Yankees, and then, of course, was caught up in the Balco controversy, the scandal. And you remember, the San Francisco Chronicle released his testimony. They released his reported testimony in which he admitted to using performance-enhancing drugs. And then, in February 2005, Giambi held a news conference. His lawyer, Arn Tellem, was at his side and basically said he was sorry, felt that he had let down everyone, media, fans, the Yankees, but never said exactly what he was sorry for, though obviously everyone knew what he was talking about. Well, here's a guy, you look at 2005 and 2006, came out of that just fine. Huge years in 05 and 06, basically what he had always been. 154 OPS plus, that's 54% above the league average when adjusted to ballpark and league. He was the old Jason Giambi, and then he went on to have a pretty good rest of the career as well. Through last year, you can look at right here, this is age 34 through 43 seasons. On-base slugging is good, OPS plus still really good. Giambi had a nice career even after being in the middle of that scandal and even after all but admitting to using performance-enhancing drugs. And as we sit here waiting for Alex Rodriguez's latest apology, you can look at Giambi as a guy who was a model of how to handle this. He obviously did what he did. He then apologized for it and then moved on and moved forward. He was not caught up in the same context of lies that Alex Rodriguez has been. Of course, it's not the same. It's not a fair analogy. But when you look at how to handle this, Giambi did a good job of it. And yes, it helped that he was always an affable presence in the clubhouse to the media. It helped him going forward.
So do you think history will look at him differently than some of the other guys because they held on or didn't come up with admitting the fact that they had used PEDs or HGH?
Fran, history already has looked at him differently. We look at him differently than we look at some of the other players from that era who may still be in denial. And again, we're not saying that Jason Giambi is any different than any of the others who used, but in just the way he handled it and the way he went forward, he clearly had an ability or showed the ability to move on. And it was a terrible era in many ways. It was an era that has caused a lot of angst for a lot of people and still is real uncomfortable to talk about for a lot of people in the game. At the same time, there were players who came out of it, even though they did what they did, on a pretty good note, and he was one of them.
Yeah, I mean, he hasn't seemed to be penalized at all for it. You know, they're talking about a manager job. He's one of the great guys. That's all you hear about Jason. So good for him because he's one of the great personalities, one of the nicest guys to ever be around. But it's really interesting how we pick and choose who we want to say, he couldn't do this.
Well, that's a good point, Hal.
Yes,
now,
it's
Giambi
okay.
is not quite a Hall of Fame candidate, a real good one, in my opinion, so he doesn't have to go through that or won't go through that. And that also is what distinguishes him here. If he was in the Hall of Fame discussion, we'd have probably a different conversation. But I'm simply talking about the narrow apology and what went on from there. Andy Pettitte did the same. He survived just fine. I don't know what it will mean for his Hall of Fame chances. He's a borderline guy anyway. Bonds obviously fought it. Clemens has fought it. And there's a different perception with those two guys. And the one thing that I want to be careful about and warn people about, really, is just because a person is a nice guy doesn't make him less guilty or not than a guy who isn't a nice guy. I'm just strictly talking about the way players handle this. And Giambi, in the way he handled it, clearly was kind of an example for how to do it correctly.
And you know what's funny, Ken, too, is that when I heard Jason was retiring, I never even thought about him with the steroids. Clearly, that's been part of his baseball history, but it was like, oh, wow, Giambi's retired. Man, he had a great career.
That's almost 10
That
years
was the
ago now.
first thought that I had.
Yeah, Harold, well, we're in February. It was 10 years ago when he made that admission that, when he basically said he was sorry, didn't make the admission formally, but everybody knew, again, what he was talking about. It's a long time that has passed. Now, speaking of time, and I don't want to get too far off on a tangent here, but as time passes, I've always thought this. Will history take a softer view of Bonds and Clemens and everyone else? I believe that is possible.